Hi all, I thought we could have a very brief look on the ICC library at McShane against Carlsen. So normally I'm using Chessbase Lite, but I thought I'd just use the ICC to have a quick examine. We do get a kind of move timings as well. It was relayed on the ICC, so you get kind of to know the clock situation. So Luke had done really well so far in the tournament, and this is the last round up against the top seed Magnus Carlsen. So Luke's stuck with a familiar strategy actually that he uses against other systems like the Sicilian defence. He voluntarily gives up the bishop here. It's the delayed exchange royal of pairs, which I've used myself once against Peter large in a long game. I ended up getting ground down, but it was interesting anyway. So after d3, I think White's common ideas, like this, putting pressure on e5, and maybe like this, trying to maneuver maybe a knight to f5, or sometimes even playing d4 and trying to get a knight to f5 like this. Okay, so in the game, these arrows are not removing. Okay, let's just carry on. Knight d7. b3, so this happens, a bit of pressure on e5 at the moment, but Magnus is kind of setting up reverse Maroczy bind because he really wants to prevent White from playing d4, and he's got the bishop pair, so he's putting up this Maroczy bind. I suspect, actually, to be fair, I think Luke must have been completely exhausted from earlier wins. He put a lot of energy throughout the whole tournament, and probably he was quite exhausted, and he's not like a total pro yet. He's like got his own he's got a job and sit away from chess, and maybe the pros, if they're much more experienced, maybe they're more effortless because they've been practicing much more. But Magnus is obviously one of the greatest talents in chess in the world at the moment. So there's that as well. Knight ce2 looks as though knight g3 to if5 might be on the cards. But now c5, we got this kind of Maroczy bind on d4 now. So knight h4 looks a bit unusual. Is knight f5 really a serious thing for black? Well, this means now knight e6 that the bishop can always retreat to f8 here if knight f5. And look how Magnus is really emphasising this Maroczy bind so far. So this is an interesting position. Knight f5, and the bishop does slip back. One moment. So we have this Maroczy bind. Is White doing that badly though? I don't know. Knight e3. He's got also the use of the c4 square potentially, as well as f4 on the cards now. Knight d4, wanting to change the pawn structure, undouble the pawns, and it looks as though after bishop e6, black would be glaring down with the bishops down this queen side. So f4 was played, which does succeed in isolating the e pawn now after f takes. But the problem is, can black maybe use this f file later? That's one problem. It's opening up the position a little bit, which means this bishop's definitely got scope everywhere, and this bishop's potentially dangerous as well. Okay, knight g1, as though knight f3 is going to be putting pressure on e5 at some point. c3 kicking that knight. It's really annoying, that knight, so it's kicked away. Then we get knight f3. So does White have a pleasant position here, or is, Magnus playing g6 is also, he's going to move this bishop away at some point and then try and use this f file. But he's got another plan coming up first after queen e1. This does commit that d3 is a bit loose in variations now. So can it be taken here? Probably not, because that wasn't what was played. If we look at queen takes d3 here, instead of what was played. Okay, so what was... Okay, let's just go back one. Queen takes d3 here without an engine, just checking this. Rook d1, knight e4. clearly that seems okay for black. So in this position, what would be the move? On this old interface I can't even turn on an engine. Intriguing, really. Knight g5 might be interesting. Just holding up e4, and then rook d1 actually threatens to win the queen because the knight's on c2 here. Okay, so rook d1 would be an imminent threat to win the queen. What would black do about it? I think this would be quite dangerous. And maybe, you know, it's like a positional pawn sack, because maybe white can now play here. Okay, let's play that. Let's say knight takes, knight d5. Positionally that looks interesting. That knight, it's on c7, it's on f6. Wow, things could get troublesome here. So anyway, Magnus wasn't keen to take the pawn here. He played a5, and he's really loosening up other light squares in Luke's position. The pawn is protected now, but this a4 looks really dangerous. It's extending the scope of that rook. You know, white really doesn't want to play c4, because then that Maroczy bind will be back with a vengeance. You know, knight d4, juicy knight on d4. So this is looking passive. Anyway, force a3. This bishop isn't looking good. The prospects of it look a bit depressing. It's just black's got a very comfortable Maroczy binds going here on that d4 square. It just looks quite passive. And now it seems Magnus, he doesn't mind his rooks working on different sides of the board here. He brings that back anyway. Okay, is there a bit of pressure? Bishop b3 now looks very annoying. If rook d2, maybe that runs into bishop h6 here. It looks really dangerous for this d3 still. And it's given here, and it's actually taken in this position. I don't think the punishment is that great now for it. Knight g4. Okay, it does look as though the h6 square and the f6 square are vulnerable. So knight h6 might be on the cards. And it is played to try and win the dark square bishop. There's a refusal to give up the dark square bishop that easily. And now queen h4. Okay, it looks as though this is, you know, maybe there's going to be some serious threats. But on the other hand, black is on f1, so knight g5 is not on the cards right now. Kicking the queen or not? Nope. Bishop g5. And Magnus voluntarily gives up his dark squared bishop, which you might think, isn't that a useful defender? But you know, white's dark squares are being weakened here. He's forced to take with the queen because of this f1. Okay, so queen takes g5. So f4 is one weakness. So as we've seen in one of my blitz games this morning, if you give up the dark square bishop, you can be in trouble on the dark squares. And in fact, okay, king g7, very curious move, king g7. Let's see what was going on here. I think rook f4 would fail tactically, horribly actually, at some point to knight e5, not here, because a rook takes f1. So what would be going on here? Maybe just something like rook f2, just holding on to f3, because you can imagine if rook g1, if instead of king g7, if rook g1, rook f3 might be dangerous, but rook f2 has the threat now of knight takes e5, and that would attack the queen. So I guess, okay, but this king g7 is curious. What was played? King g7. What is the idea of king g7? It's holding down the queen maybe to just simply protect the knight. The knight doesn't really want to play knight f5 because it's just taking. Queen goes back. It looks as though this looks all pretty horrible, this stuff. You know, this is weak, this is weak, this is weak. 3 pawn islands just there. 4th here. Was there an opportunity missed? I believe there was an opportunity missed at some point. It may have been at this coming up here, because rook d1. What about knight g5 here? This is what I heard actually on chessgames.com. An opportunity was missed at some point, and it could have been in this situation here. If we look at this, the queen is protecting f1 now. Knight e6 is threatened, and that looks really quite dangerous initially, because we're also attacking here. What would Magnus do in this position? This looks pretty dangerous and is worthy of further investigation, possibly. You know, this is unacceptable. Let's say bishop g8. Is that plausible? Rook takes f4. Well, this certainly looks as though white has chances. Okay, so let's go back to the game. In the game, rook d1 was played, and instead of, okay, queen takes e4 might be asking for trouble with knight g5 there. So queen c4 keeps an eye on the f1 rook. Rook moves to e1 now. Okay, and now doubling, so it seems coordination. And okay, this knight is actually a tactical liability right now. Knight g5, okay, setting up a potential, you know, if takes a potential maybe knight takes e6 and then g3 maybe to win the rook. Bishop move back. So let's say king takes, then knight takes, and then maybe g3 here. Okay, so in the game continuation, just simply bishop c8, not minding retreating. Magnus seems to control the position quite intuitively, just with a lot of coordinated pieces here. It just seems a bit of a tired effort so far from white in this game, and unfortunately, but he had a fantastic tournament overall. Luke McShane, you know, beating Morozevich, Kramnik, and Aronian. You know, these are three players not many super GMs could beat in the very same tournament. But anyway, knight takes f5 check. Okay, Pisak, what does it do? It doesn't really seem to do much apart from offer queen g5, but is that harmless check? Magnus simply plays rook e2, and that's the end of game, I think. After check, he resigns here. e4's dropping. Okay, bit of a nightmare. Looks like a tired game, to be honest. I don't think it's that worthy of huge analysis, but Luke McShane has played brilliant games. I think the reason I'm keen to show this is that it was the game which got Magnus Carlsen the tournament victory. He remained undefeated throughout the whole tournament, Magnus, and some people were kind of disappointed it was drawing, but it was very tough tournament, and he did well just with the wins he did have and all the draws and not losing to just win the tournament. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.